Okay, so welcome to another session of Feature Fridays, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Nikolai. So, Nikolai, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi guys, thanks for inviting me. My name is Nikolai Patrikov, and I'm the technical product manager responsible for disaster recovery and migration solutions, in particular VMware Cloud Director Availability.
Yeah, you're the man, and that's why we got you on today. And for those who don't know me, my name is Guy Bartram. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for the Cloud Director suite of products. Obviously, Cloud Director Availability is one of those key products that I own from a marketing perspective, and you own from the technical marketing perspective. So today we're going to talk through one of the areas of Cloud Director Availability that I think is a real bonus to the product, and one of the areas that perhaps is not so well known, and that is the migration capability of Cloud Director Availability and how it can be used by service providers to help onboard customers and obviously drive that all-important consumption number. So Nikolai, let's just talk through migration then. What is the migration option with Cloud Director Availability, and why is it
Okay,
cool?
let me quickly share my screen. I have prepared a few slides to run and
Sure.
also a demo for how easy it happens. So the migration, it has been done many times with Cloud Director Availability, and it is a very, very simple process that we consider is suitable for self-service. The setup process on both sides, provider and tenant, is very quick, very easy, matter of minutes to deploy the different appliances. And then once you have deployed them, the UI is very simple and intuitive that we're going to show.
Hmm.
And it doesn't require additional training or something really rocket science kind of thing to work with it. And it puts very minimum requirements for the tenants, which makes the onboarding process really simple. And uh, the simpler it is, the better, the more onboarded tenants there will be.
Yeah, sure.
Um, Also, it is natively integrated with the VMware, different VMware products, including the plugins for Cloud Director and vCenter that enhance the capabilities of these products and make the process really smooth to run. And last but not least, in terms of integration, there is no transformation of virtual machines as they're taken from the vCenter and directly migrated to Cloud Director and don't need to change the disks or the OS or fine tune it afterwards. You just take it and then power it on. So this is a great benefit. And everything happens in a secure way. The traffic is encrypted. All the components are developed by VMware. You don't need anything external to count on, so no security breaches. And also, there is some support for encrypted virtual machines.
So let's just summarize that then. So as a cloud provider, I've got my potential customers out there, or I've got my existing customers who I manage, in their data center, and I also manage on my premise. Um, we've got vSphere at both ends. So as you say, there's no transformation, there's no detaching of disks, there's no disk conversion to a different hypervisor format. So there's no staging effectively, so you save a ton of cash on operational costs of staging and capital expenditure for a staging environment. There's a UI that the tenant is used to, which is the vSphere UI, and there's a very simple plugin for Cloud Director Availability to plug into that UI. They can download it, and then and we'll see, right? They connect through to the service provider, to the org VDC in the service provider's virtual VCD environment, and then they can start replicating and cut over, and they can do that all via self-service, either via the vSphere UI or via the VCD UI.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
encryption, yeah, all traffic is encrypted and secure. So self-service, minimal risk because there's no transformation, and yeah, simplicity right to the core of the solution. I mean, this is really so easy. It's
Yeah.
quite ridiculous. I mean, we kind of sort of talk about, migration to cloud, but if you're migrating to a VMware cloud, then this is definitely the easiest solution available.
Exactly, it's just a few clicks away from the end goal, so it's
Yeah,
really, really easy. And talking about simplicity, here is the actual flow that is happening. So there is an optional step zero, which is kind of popular now because of certain benefits like no change of network settings and continuity of service. This is the extension of the on-premises network to cloud. And it is not so complex process that the provider needs to execute in order to achieve it. And for the tenant, it's like a piece of cake, two, three things in the UI, and that's it. Then the actual migration, it's the preparation of the migration and the execution of the migration, these two steps. So you don't need to do anything in the meantime or to go outside of the product for any reason. Everything happens in there
right.
and is a very, very simple process.
So just before we move on there, so what we're saying here is you've got a very simple way then of delivering a migration, either layer three, yeah, layer three and above, kind of IP changes involved, i.e., I have to move workload from one network to the disaster recovery environment to a different network, and I have to re-IP and readdress the application and all the components the application relies on, all the data feeds and data outputs. It's a disaster recovery solution, but it's not exactly pretty. You're not going to be up and running very quickly. However, you will be up and running. Versus establishing the layer two connectivity between that. So essentially, the on-prem and the provided data center. Provided data center just seems like an extension of the on-prem to the
Exactly.
actual workloads, and literally then replicating. And when you start up your DR workload, then there is no need to re-IP. They can reach back into the existing on-prem if there's any data feeds that you miss, so you don't have to necessarily do those really in-depth assessments of the workloads. So it's easier. So and this is all within the VMware toolset, right? We're talking about L2 VPN within the current toolset that all of the providers have got within the 7-point core.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nothing additional needed.
It's operated by NSX, either VRT, so it is something that is already part of the cloud provider center.
Okay, so the message to cloud providers here is like quite simply, why wouldn't you do this?
Exactly.
All right.
Okay, and the different ways of migrating, I'm going to quickly show two of them in these slides. One is the code migration, that is not something very typical, but if you're looking to cut cost and can afford downtimes, of course, this is the migration that you can do. You just power off the machine and synchronize it to the cloud. Very simple. But what I'm going to actually demonstrate as well live in the product is the warm migration. This is minimum downtime migration that is taking the VM while it's up and running and does several synchronizations. First, the initial synchronization that is taking the VM and pushing it to the cloud provider data center. Then once we um, have finished this step. And if we don't run the migration process right away, every 24 hours, we get another synchronization of the disk of this VM. And once we start the actual migration, we have the online sync, which again performs like a delta synchronization with the existing state. We power it off and take everything that we couldn't capture before powering off with the online sync and push everything to the cloud, and then power it off, power it on. So it's a very smooth and quick process. You see, it's a matter of minutes actually for a decent sized VM, and you don't risk the applications to uh, have any issues with it as you keep the layer 2 network extension there, so you don't need to change the settings. And if you run a service that still remains on-prem, you can still count on it like Active Directory or DNS or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, that's important. So, so in the warm migration, so I just want to kind of understand something. So in the warm migration, you're doing obviously when you set up the migration, you start the replication, and you might not run the migration for a week, 2 weeks. When you come to then say, right, I want to run that migration, that's where it takes another sync from its last sync point, which you said was every 24 hours. Is that right for migration?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
So it's only going to sync the diff between the last 24 hours, still what we term the initial sync, and the
Mhm.
differential between now. So that's pretty quick. So then you have your shutdown and you restart, or you shut down another sync, and then the power on. So it should be a really small time period. Now, the cold migration, a lot of people say, well, why would I bother with a cold migration? I can see one use case there is you offer it for free. Configure a pay-as-you-go org VDC and have people migrate into there themselves, and they do their cold migration. Whereas more warm migration and layer two obviously involves a bit more configuration and has a substantially more value in terms of the criticality of the workloads you might be migrating are going to be business critical, so they would require less downtime. So it's
Mhm.
worth paying for that as a service. That's maybe one option. Is there any other options that you can think of for cold migration versus warm?
Well, for code, it can be used for part of the apps, like if you have a development environment that you would like to push and it's not business critical, then you can use it. But yeah, in general, you covered all the different scenarios.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so now let's go to the live demo. Um, I'll simulate the tenant experience and how it looks for them, what they do to perform a self-service migration. This is my tenant vCenter with some VMs running here. First, for extending the network, we need an NSX autonomous edge. And here, the settings that need to be done are minimal for the tenant. You just need to add a session. The peer code is provided by the provider, and it includes all the connectivity details that are encrypted. So nothing is publicly invisible. You just copy paste it from the text file that provider sends you, add the session, and then attach a port. For that, you pick the right session, and you get the tunnel ID, which is a setting of NSX on the provider side. So they'll provide this as well as part of the configuration. And with that, you're basically done setting and extending your network um, to the cloud. Once
Okay.
you have,
So from that point on, you are attached.
yeah, exactly,
Okay,
you're
good.
attached.
Yeah.
And once we're done with that, um, I'll show the case how you perform the migration from the VCDA UI, because I'll use the case to show the new UI. As with 4.1, we come with a bit reorganized UI, but
Hmm.
in general, you can do exactly the same thing directly from the vCenter plugin that is in there. So in order to configure a new migration here, you go to the incoming replications in this case and click new migration. You specify the VM that you would like to migrate. If you already have a migration task running, you see this small information here that it is already there and you cannot double it.
Hmm.
So I select the VM, select the resources that it will use on the provider VDC, and click next. Here we can enable compression to reduce the traffic. We can delay the synchronization. So if we want not to start right away, as it might be a peak hour for
Mm.
the service that is running on this VM, we can postpone it by a few hours. We can exclude some disks if they are not really needed for the VM, if there are some old archive kind of thing, or we have other way to copy them. And if we have an old version of the VM stored in the cloud provider, we can use it as a seed VM. And
Yeah, that's a seed VM, so that's something that maybe for a very, very large VM would be shipped to the provider via USB disk or something like that. Is that
yeah,
correct? Okay,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. If it is something really big, it will optimize the traffic.
Hmm.
And that's it. Basically, the summary, and I can click finish. Once I do that, the migration is started, and I can track the state of the migration here, and also how quickly it happens, and what is the synchronization percentage.
Okay, and you can see things
Once,
like live traffic stats there, is that right?
yeah, yeah,
And
it
that's
is updated, and this is the actual step one of the process, configuration of the migration that
mhm.
we execute. So this is the initial sync that is happening right now, and it for a quite decent sized VM now, and with my network settings, it will take a few minutes to fully synchronize this machine.
Okay.
So
So
it's a
so
quick process.
yeah, just so in the meantime, so for those who don't know, I don't know if we were quite clear about this, but VMware Cloud Director Availability, the UI we're seeing now is a plugin to VMware Cloud Director. Um, and tenants have access to this plugin then to go and configure migrations and disaster recovery as a service. We're showing migration today because we wanted to kind of focus in on this use case specifically. Um, and what the tenant is replicating into is what we call an organization virtual data center, an org VDC, which is something the service provider would set up with some resources perhaps allocated against that, so CPU, memory, and storage. Um, that then is replicating, from the on-prem into that org VDC, where it will then start, right? And if it's got the layer two connectivity going, then is the org VDC then is running the same networking address space as the on-prem network. So is that correct, Nikolai?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So and in this case, we're executing the migration at the target site, i.e., at the vCloud Director UI, but this could equally be executed by the vCenter plugin by the tenant on their side if they wanted to.
Yeah, as part of the self-service.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you can see, while the migration is running the initial sync, the VM is live and has no disruptions in its performance or service availability.
Okay. So that's an initial sync without touching the VM at all at
Yeah,
this point.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And it is almost done.
So is this something that you can schedule the initial sync to be out of office hours, which is useful. What
Mm.
about sort of change windows and maintenance periods? Usually people cut over in maintenance periods. Is there any way to do that scheduling via API or any other mechanism of doing it?
Yep, it can be done also through an API, but we always prefer doing it through the UI, as it simplifies the experience for the tenant.
Yeah. So no, I'm saying if the provider was doing this as a managed service,
Hmm.
and they agreed they would do a migration of the tenants' workloads at, I don't know, 1 a.m. in the morning. They want to make
Yeah.
sure it's all done before that, so they would configure the initial syncs to happen maybe,
Hmm.
11 p.m. So when they come to that 1 a.m., then they're just doing the failover sync.
Yeah. Okay, so we can see the replication is already done, the initial sync of the replication. And what we can do here, in case we don't have the layer 2 stretch, we can change the network settings of this VM, and we can reconfigure them for the new target site. But in our case now, we don't need to do anything because it is already using the same gateway and same network settings. So now the second step is to actually migrate the VM itself, and I can just run the migrate process. And the important thing here is to connect to the right network on the target site, which probably will be the only one visible for the tenant. So
Hmm.
it's not something that they can make a mistake, and we can decide if to power on or not the VM once the migration process is done. I'll power it on and start the actual migration.
Okay, so that's useful, that networking piece. So if you're not using the layer two connectivity, then you can kind of make the changes. But that's only making changes at the OS level. It's not making the application changes. So if there are any
Yeah,
in-application config files or IP addresses, then you need to delve into the detail there.
exactly. It complicates the process a little bit. So this is why it's
Yeah.
always better to just migrate with the stretch network.
And what was the, sorry, I noticed the consolidation of VM disks there as well, which was an option in the migrate. What does that function do?
We can pick which disks to be migrated with the VM if it has multiple, and maybe
Ah,
some old ones that are not in use anymore with archives that can be excluded from the process.
got it. Okay. Obviously, with Windows VM, you've got to be quite sort of careful what you do with disks, and
Yeah,
otherwise you get all sorts of problems.
yeah. This is why I took the example with Windows because it's a bit more demanding as an OS, and
Yeah, it's definitely the hardest. Yeah, for sure. So while we're just talking through that, do you want to just explain a little bit more about the L2 VPN? What's required on the customer side and on the provider side? Does it handle VNT or what are the kind of nuances here?
yeah. So on the customer side, we only need the autonomous edge that we show the settings. So it's not a full NSX deployment. You don't need to configure too many things. It's just the autonomous edge, which has a very simple deployment process. And the only complex thing is finding and the right password because it's really strict on password policy. So this is quite difficult. But apart from that, it is a very small, simple appliance that is deployed in the virtual center of the tenant,
Hmm.
and then it is capable of connecting to the already present NSX in the cloud, as it is part of the cloud director requirements to have an NSX VRT deployed in there. So you cannot go without it, which means also no additional effort on provider side apart from configuring uh, the gateways,
Yeah.
tier two,
Okay. So that's
tier one,
business
and
as
tier
normal,
zero.
really. Yeah. And then giving a certificate out to the tenant to configure it.
Yeah, it is something that you generate directly in NSX on cloud side, and you can just push it as a file to the customer. And since it's encrypted, it is not considered a security breach.
Hmm.
And yeah, while we are talking, we can see that it has already finished the migration. And here is the new VM already powered on and live. So it's powered off on the vCenter side.
Got it. Yep. So it does leave it behind then on the vCenter side, on the source side, if you did want to kind of reverse the action or um, reverse the migration. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, in case something wrong happens.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and is there anything else to kind of see while we're looking around the UIs here in terms of the
Uh,
migration?
Nope, actually, this is it. It's very simple and very easy and very quick, as you could see. And there is no additional actions to be performed. So that's all.
So for all our VCD providers out there, this is probably the easiest way of migrating customers with vSphere from their on-prem into your cloud. It's free, and that's a feature of Cloud Director Availability is obviously the migration feature is free. There's no time period, no bound on it. You just have to set up your job as a migration job, isn't that right, Nikolai? And then
Yeah.
usage meter catches that as a migration job. If it takes you a week to do it or a month, it doesn't matter. It's free for a indeterminate time period. And there you go. So warm migrations with layer 2, simple layer 2 connectivity, which you're already able to use and are paying for within your 7-point Flex core to drive the migrations of VMs onto your platform. Awesome.
Yep. Just one thing to add here,
Hmm.
guys, sorry, is that we're coming with a detailed blog post on how to configure the layer 2 connectivity with NSXV and NSXT. So it will be there with the exact steps to be followed, and it will simplify the provider setup process as well.
Awesome. We'll look forward to seeing that. Nikolai, thank you very much for joining me on today's Feature Friday and for setting up the lab and walking us through the migration. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.